It's 7 o'clock, believe it or not. Hi, everybody. I'm a real alcoholic. My name's Harmon. Hey, good to see everybody here. We are getting close, believe it or not. I don't know. That time thing is out of control. Anyhow, where we're at, we are going to be on Tradition 11 tonight. And this tradition talks about something we added down on the bottom under there in parentheses, anonymity. We've been going off and on with that for really since we've been here. And I'd like to start with this one. Because of God's grace and because I'm a member in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I found the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And because of that, I am sober with God's grace today, 11,100 days, which is 30 years, 4 months, and 19 days. And it's absolutely mind-boggling. And also that other thing that we'll be doing here in another month or so is we always like to go to the quiet place before we pray our Serenity Prayer from the heart instead of saying it from the head, and invite God in so we can get whatever he needs to give us in the manner we need to get it, if we could. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. And we've also been writing these things on about the 3 pertinent ideas that we coined them of the traditions: unity, primary purpose, responsibility. And we find out, obviously, humility, sacrifice, and this word anonymity. And remember in the beginning, Bill talked about the 12 traditions as far as being for relations, and we have the 3 relations, and we have +2. If anybody was keeping track, last week was 1, so we got another one this week. We've gone at great length to talk about an AA group, a group of AAs, an AA meeting, a meeting of AAs, and a special purpose group. And speaking of which, somebody donated these, 1 per customer, if you would. AA group, and this is something I've been referring to from the beginning. 12 traditions, you illustrated the history, and of course our checklist, and thank you for the anonymous donor of that. And much to our surprise, found another unity, and it was in the beginning of the book. So he obviously talks about unity, and especially in the first tradition, but you'll be amazed what anonymity will give us. And there's different types. We have substantial, essential, powerful, perfect, wonderful, worldwide, surpassing, continued, unbreakable, and group unity. So how many are we getting there? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Maybe we'll find 12. And would that be odd or God if we did that? That's really been the fabric, if you will, of what we've been doing from the beginning until now. And what we like to start with is a few thoughts. We got a lot of reading tonight, if we can, so how about if I go ahead and pass this syllabus around, and then something that's going to come around after that is some people have been asking about the schedule for the thing in January that's here, so that'll be coming around, and that's that other meeting, so we'll go ahead and get this around too, Paulie. I'll go ahead and put it there, or thank you. Cheryl will do that. So anyhow, we've established that the 12 traditions work not because we're better people, they work because we are weaker people. Bill said that implicit through the 12 traditions is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. We admit character defects, that we have character defects as a society, and that these defects threaten us continually. AA works in spite of us, not because of us. And Bill said, our whole AA program is securely founded on the principle of humility. That is the perspective that obviously we relate ourselves rightly to God, our fellows. In other words, we're cut down to the right size. Right size. You need more?
No, it says traditions on here.
I hate when that happens.
What do I do? Pull back?
Yeah,
Very back out.
There could have been at the bottom. Uh-oh.
They were at the bottom.
And were they at the bottom? I hate when that happens. Yeah, you know what? You can go ahead and get rid of that. My bad. See what happens? So recycle that or get rid of it. So, anyhow, Bill said in October 47 that success could be the heady wine in a serious problem. And he always said first things will always need to be first. Humility before success. Unity before fame. Bill said if we maintain humility and so our unity, and he always reminds us that we are people who could not exist at all except for the grace of God, this anonymity. And obviously we've established that 12 traditions take us from anonymity to humility and everything that's in between. We'd like to read this thing that Bill wrote too. Bill said, quote, we need a statement of principles, some form of code of traditions, a genuine need for some great unifying, overreaching set of truths that could apply to all the groups, all the time, and serve them in growth, just like the steps do for the individual. And we've also found this in 1949 that was written, and it says, AA's 12 traditions, a pattern of practical experience. The traditions are the essence of the experience of the groups and the movement. They were written by Bill in an attempt to distill and condense in usable form the knowledge that the groups and the individual members, thank you, have accumulated. The traditions are a pattern of practical experience, a guide that will spare many other headaches. And also, too, we've got this. It's called The Language of the Heart. And he goes as this. Why at this particular point in history has God chosen to communicate his healing grace to so many of us? Every aspect of this global unfoldment can be related to a single crucial word. The word is communication. There has been life-saving communication among ourselves, with the world around us, and with God. From the beginning, communication in AA has been no ordinary transmission of helpful ideas and attitudes. Because of our kinship in suffering and because of our common means of deliverance are effective for ourselves only when constantly carried to others. Our channels of contact have always been charged with the language of the heart. And also I found this that Bill wrote, and the title of this, actually it's a combination of two things that he wrote that is rather appropriate for this juncture of it, and it's called Compelling Love. And he says the life of each AA and of each group is built around our 12 steps and 12 traditions. We know that the penalty for extensive disobedience to these principles is death for the individual and disillusionment for the group. But an even greater force of AA's unity is our compelling love for our fellow members and for our principles. So many people want to know why General Service doesn't do anything, and here is your answer. You might think the people at AA's headquarters in New York would surely have some personal authority, but long ago, trustees and secretaries alike found they could do no more than make very mild suggestions to the AA groups. They even had to coin a couple of sentences which still go into half the letters they write. Quote, of course you're at perfect liberty to handle this matter in any way you please, but the majority experience in AA does seem to suggest, and you fill in the blank whatever issue you're dealing with. AA's world headquarters is not a giver of orders. It is instead our largest transmitter of the lessons of experience. So that should answer any and all questions. We like to start with the short form of the traditions and then go to the long form. And once again, if you weren't here, these short form were written by a guy named Earl Treat. Him and Bill pared down the long form of the traditions to 200 words so they could be read at an AA meeting and it wouldn't take up too much of the time. And we've established that sometimes, a lot of times, most of the time, some of the ideas can be watered down or not even transmitted short form versus long. Listen to the difference between short form 11 and long form. Number 11, short form. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always, that's a pretty powerful word, always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Listen to the long form. 11, our long form. Our relations with the general public should be characterized by personal anonymity. We think AA ought to avoid sensational advertising. Our names and pictures of AA members ought not be broadcast, filmed, or publicly printed. Our public relations should be guided by the principle of attraction rather than promotion. There is never need to praise ourselves. We feel it better to let our friends recommend us. Big difference between the two. So, the 12 traditions obviously are referred to as why it works. They ensure the continuance of AA as a whole by providing guidelines for groups to evaluate their activities and actions. In a practical vein, individually and collectively, humility builders for the group, they ask the group to consider its conduct from a broader perspective and when necessary, give up something for the overall good of AA. Suppose that's another word for sacrifice, right? The traditions also contain spiritual principles. These principles, when applied in our lives, complement the steps as a guide to personal recovery. Here are the principles that I try to live by and strive for in my daily life. Number 11, personal ambition has no place in AA. There is never need to praise ourselves, attraction rather than promotion. So, we talked a lot about anonymity. Before we can talk about it, it's like everything else, I better get an understanding on the English language of what anonymity is. Anonymity, it's a noun, and it is this: the state or quality of being anonymous. That means I have to know what anonymous is. Number 2, definition of anonymity is an anonymous. So what is anonymous? English language is absolutely fascinating. Did you know that anonymous is both an adjective and an adjective? And here are the definitions. Number 1, without name acknowledged as that as an author or contributor. In other words, an anonymous letter to the editor, an anonymous donation. Number 2, of unknown name whose name is withheld, an anonymous author. Number 3, lacking individuality, unique character, or distinction. An example would be an endless row of drab anonymous houses. Anonymous, adjective, definition number 1, from or by a person, author, etc., whose name is unknown or withheld. Anonymous letter. Number 2, having no name. Number 3, lacking individual characteristics, unexceptional. And number 4, often capital, denoting an organization which provides help to applicants who remain anonymous. And I'll be damned, they say Alcoholics Anonymous after that. So, before we go any further with the anonymity, I would challenge us all to have this conference-approved pamphlet. And it says, Understanding Anonymity, copyright 1981. And it goes through many subjects and questions and answers. Anonymity on the person-to-person basis, anonymity at the public level, some questions and answers about anonymity. And then it concludes with facts about anonymity in AA. And I'm going to stress this one. We'll play there's two sides to every coin. Bulletproof, I think, number 9. It says, use last names within the fellowship, especially for election of group officers or other service jobs. Dr. Bob, our co-founder, out of Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers Conference Approved Literature, I believe it's page 263 or 163 or 64. He said there's 2 ways of breaking anonymity. We know at the level of press, radio, and film. And he said also in here by not using our last names. We can be so anonymous that people can't find us in AA and we're of no help. And I'll be darned, that's what it said within the fellowship, use your last name. And how that happened is Dr. Bob went up to Detroit to do a talk, and he was going home, and somebody drove him up there. As they were saying their goodbyes, the guy from Detroit had asked him, said, if you guys get lost or if you have trouble, call me. Dr. Bob, in his manner, bedpan if you will, very dry but sharp, said, I would love to call you, Mark, but do you know how many Mark S's there are in the phone book? He couldn't do that, and he said, that is as bad as breaking anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. Depends what part of the country you're from. Thank God around here we're not so bad. I've done enough traveling outside where it is almost nauseous or sickening when people don't use their last names within the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they claim that you're breaking anonymity when you do that, I suppose because they don't know what Alcoholics Anonymous is and isn't, don't know about our conference-approved literature and why in the house. Very important that I understand anonymity, because if I don't have a handle on that, then these short and long forms will not make sense. We have an anonymity statement, announcement for reading at meetings open to the public. I'm going to go ahead and read that too in case we're not familiar with that. It says, there may be some here who are not familiar with our tradition of personal anonymity at the public level. Quote, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always to maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Thus, we respectfully ask that AA speakers and AA members not be photographed, videotaped, or identified by full names on audio tapes and published or broadcast reports of our meetings, including those reports and media technologies such as the internet. The assurance of anonymity is essential in our efforts to help other problem drinkers who may wish to share our own recovery program with us, and our tradition of anonymity reminds us that that AA principles come before personalities, not above, before. That gets twisted around here so bad. It says before, not above. Come back next week, and that's with that. Box 459. I will, if you aren't a subscriber to that, I strongly suggest you'll do that. When is break your anonymity not an anonymity break? This happens to come from the fall of 2012. Questions and answers. I will let you research that yourself because we don't have time to do that. Absolutely fascinating. Now, much to everybody's maybe surprise, we have what's called AA guidelines from our General Service Office in New York. It says internet. Ta-da! And everybody knows about that thing there. So it says AA traditions and the internet. And I would say there is about, 15, 20 different subjects when we're talking about with the internet. So it is addressed. And once again, I suggest being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous that I have this, understand it, and follow it because it addresses the epidemic that we have. Now, what we're talking about as far as the anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films, quickly because we've got a lot to go. Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship and the program should not be anonymous. The members should be. And there's 3 levels of why that's so important. I happen to be a victim of a break on 2 of them, and I had nothing to do with it, and this is how dangerous it is. The reason that we don't do it at the level of press, radio, and film is obviously a lot of celebrities have done that, and they end up drinking again, and something bad happens. What that does to anybody who's sitting on the fence of coming into AA says, screw that, because if I come in, I am going to be all over the paper. Screw that AA, because it don't work, because the movie star or whatever was the AA and he's drinking again. So we just march them to the wall and kill them. And then obviously it's going to give the impression that Alcoholics Anonymous is not anonymous at all, and it's a very, 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 very dangerous thing. Now, what happened to me personally, and I talked about it, and I will talk about it again until I die. One time, down at Mount Peace Cemetery, Founders Day weekend, our local paper had a full-faced identifiable photo of me, and I did not give permission. And boy, carotid, I almost had a stroke. That was after my wife called up and just about castrated me. She goes, what the hell are you know what I'm saying? So I said, no, and the phone was ringing off the hook. So I got a hold of the publisher, I got a hold of the editor, I got a hold of the reporter, and I got a hold of the photographer. It was too late, damage was already done. But once again, can you imagine somebody sitting on the front saying, sitting on the fence coming in AA, my God, if I go to AA, I'm going to be on the front page of the Akron Beacon Journal. It was too late for what it was already done with that. And, and I felt worse for my wife because some of the people she was working with didn't know about me. And I felt bad for her on that behalf. Another thing, this was just a couple years ago, motorcycle procession. Somebody took the liberty of having it on video. They put it on YouTube. That thing was on YouTube before the finishing ceremonies down at Akron U. I got home, and we still have a landline and a recorder, and you should have heard some of the things that were left on my voicemail. I should have saved it. And one of them says, how dare you do that? And I said, can you help a brother out? What are you talking about? What did I do? I mean, I do a lot of things, but it wasn't that. She accused me of willingly and wantingly and knowingly that was on there. And absolutely, positively was the farthest thing from that. Didn't even know existed until I got these phone calls or whatever. Once again, how dare you do that? It's bad enough for me individually, but to get over myself, how dare you do that to Alcoholics Anonymous, and most importantly, the new man or woman that could be coming in, and as important, or maybe more important, how dare you do that to Almighty God and this fellowship called Alcoholics Anonymous? And so when you're hurting God, and you're hurting Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're hurting the new man or woman, then I really got an issue. Like I said, I can get over myself in a quick enough period. So, what we do, obviously, this thing with attraction rather than promotion, it is so important that we do that in our public relations policy. We know that as press, radio, film, and of course we know about almighty cyberspace and social media, and it's very, very important that we get a handle on this, and I strongly suggest by doing that. Here's what's really kind of weird about this is how anonymity started was backwards of how it is now. Originally, the anonymity was to protect us from the public because of the stigma and the bad rap that alcoholics had. And ironically, God knew it, but it really turned out to protect ourselves from ourselves as far as being a big shot and stepping out and doing all the things that we're not supposed to do. So ironically, it turned to be exact opposite of how it started. In other words, it was to protect ourselves from the outside world But God knew really we needed to protect ourselves from ourselves. It's beautiful. An example of that is Bill was, Wilson, our thing was going to be on the Time magazine. And they approached him and said, Bill, you're man of the year, do this, Alcoholics Anonymous, all that. Said, we want to do it. And, like any magazine, they obviously want a full name and face and yada, yada. And he said, no, I can't do that. So he kind of explained it to them. And they said, oh, okay, we get it. How about if you sit at your desk and we'll do a picture of the back of your head? And Bill always, till his last breath, was always thinking on how he could get the message to the new man or woman. I mean, he had an obsession with that was just unparalleled to none that I know of. He struggled with that and turned it down. And he wrestled with that until he died because he didn't know if that was the right thing to do or if it was the wrong thing to do. But what he did, once again, I call him one of the biggest tragic heroes, him and his wife Lois, what they gave up personally and what they gave up in their own lives for the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, always thinking of you and I first. I mean, it was just incredible, the sacrifices that they made. In fact, Bill, at the end, couldn't even go to the fellowship, couldn't even function in the society that he created because we, meaning you and I in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, put him on a different plateau. We put him godlike or saintly-like or something like that, and all he wanted to do was be a member of AA, and he couldn't even do that. And thinking about that, that is a tragic hero. Anyhow, I'm sure you've probably seen this late at night or when you were drinking or not drinking about they have people that are alcoholics. And they say, oh my God, there's an alcoholic on TV, full name. No, those are actors, so we don't have to worry about that. But obviously, they are portraying what an alcoholic would be, and they are the public information commercials. You don't see them too much anymore, but if you do see one, it is not somebody breaking their anonymity. It's actors acting like they are anonymous. So let's see what we have to say tonight on there, and I know we got a lot to cover. Oddly enough, this one article is quite long, so we will go ahead and do that. How about on 91 and then 92, I think is where we're starting. Tradition 11. And look at this, too. October of 1948. And it's absolutely fascinating. And by the way, for you history people, Bill was one of the biggest breakers of anonymity of the whole fellowship, until he finally got it, and he got it in a big way. Anyhow, it goes on as this. Providence, and by the way, that is foreseeing care and guidance of God. Providence. Providence has been looking after the public relations of Alcoholics Anonymous. It can scarcely have been otherwise. Though we are more than a dozen years old, hardly a syllable of criticism or ridicule has ever been spoken of AA. That's because we stayed out of the limelight. Somehow we have been spared all the pains of medical and religious controversy, and we have good friends both wet and dry, right and left. Like most societies, we are sometimes scandalous. I love that, okay? But never yet in public. From all over the world not come keen sympathy and downright admiration. Our friends of the press and radio have outdone themselves. Anyone can see that we are in a fair way to be spoiled. Our reputation is already so much better than our actual character. Oh, that is a beautiful paragraph, isn't it? Listen to what he says, and it goes back to what we're talking about here. Listen to what he says about providence. Surely these phenomenal blessings must, not should, could, ought to, have a deep purpose. And I'm here to tell you what the deep purpose is. It's that word, the, vital. It's a matter of life and death. He says later on, I'll go ahead and jump the gun. It says that this tradition ensures our unity and our effectiveness. So we're going to go ahead and get out of it right away. Tradition 11 ensures tradition 1. 1 ensures traditions 2 through 9. It's that full circle again. Okay, it goes on to say, who doubts that this purpose wishes to let every alcoholic in the world know that AA is truly for him? Can he only want his liberation enough? Hence, our messages go through public channels have never been seriously discolored, nor has the searing breath of prejudice ever issued from anywhere. Good public relations. See where we're going with that? And look where we're talking about these relations, all the way in tradition 11. Are AA's lifelines reaching out to the alcoholic who still does not know us. Uh-oh, so now we really see how important this tradition is. It's for the newcomer. And obviously, constant thought of others is how we stay sober, how we recover. Okay, and it says, for years to come, our growth is sure to depend upon the strength and number of these lifelines. One serious public relations calamity could always turn away thousands away from us to perish, a matter of life and death indeed. That's how important tradition 11 is. It's vital, life and death. The future poses no greater problem or challenge to AA than how best to preserve a friendly and vital, life and death, relation to all, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, all the world about us. So these public relations obviously is for not just alcoholics, but for the whole world. Success will rest heavily upon right principles, a wise vigilance, and the deepest personal responsibility. Uh-oh, I get it. Responsibility and anonymity are linked because of humility and sacrifice and all the other pertinent ideas. Okay, and it says, obviously, on part of every one of us, not some of us, not most of us, not a lot of us, not quite a few, every one of us. Nothing less will do, else our brother may again turn his face away to the wall because we did not care enough. That's big responsibility now. How powerful is that? Now he goes on to say, so the 11th tradition stands centennial over the lifelines, announcing there is no need for self-praise, that it is better to let our friends recommend us, and that our whole, not part of it, not some of it, not a lot of it, our whole public relations policy, contrary to the usual custom, should be based on the principle of attraction rather than promotion. Shot in the arm methods are not for us. No press agents, no promotional devices, no big names. These hazards are too great. Immediate results will always, not sometimes, not a lot, not most, not quite a few, be elusive because easy shortcuts to notoriety can generate permanent and smothering liabilities. More and more, therefore, we are emphasizing the principle of personal anonymity when it comes to our public relations. We ask of each other the highest degree of personal responsibility in this respect. As a movement, we have been, before now, tempted to exploit the names of our well-known public characters. We have rationalized to the other societies, even the best, to do the same. As individuals, we have sometimes believed that the public use of our names could demonstrate our personal courage in the face of stigma, so lending power and conviction to news stories and magazine articles. But these are not the allures they once were. Vividly, we're becoming aware that no member ought to describe himself in full view of the general public as an AA, even for the most worthy purpose. He said, no member. No exceptions, okay? Lest a perilous precedent be set, which would tempt others to do likewise for purposes not so worthy. We see that on breaking anonymity by press, radio, or pictures, any one of us could easily transfer the valuable name of Alcoholics Anonymous over to another enterprise in the midst of any controversy. Oh, so now wait a minute. I see now Tradition 11 ensures Tradition 5, 6, and 10. Wow. Powerful, powerful, powerful. Okay, then goes on to say, so it is becoming our code that these things that no AA ever does, lest divert AA from its sole purpose, Tradition 5 and 6, and injure our public relations and thereby the chances of those sick ones yet to come. He always goes back to that. To the million alcoholics who have not heard of AA or have heard of our AA story, we should ever say, greetings and welcome. Be assured that we shall never weaken the lifelines which we float out to you. In our public relations we shall, God willing, keep the faith. That really says a whole lot about Tradition 11 and what we do and don't do. Page 93, we don't have to go too far over there, where it says Tradition 11, the end of the paragraph there. It says, Tradition 11 asks in our public relations that we be alert against sensationalism and declares there is never, the N word, need to praise ourselves. Personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film is urgently required. Uh-oh, not should, not could, not ought to. Now he's telling it is required, okay? Thus avoiding the pitfall of vanity and the temptation through broken anonymity to link AA to other causes. So you can see how Tradition 11 covers a whole lot of space besides just Tradition 11. Now, let's see what he says on 319. Second paragraph, if you will. It says, now, let's examine that vital Tradition 11. We talked about that again and again. Vital is matter of life and death. It says it deals with our public relations. Here is our greatest channel of communication to the alcoholic who still suffers. Wow. Now he's taking it to the whole level. Now I'm really charged with sacrifice, anonymity, humility, and responsibility through Tradition 11. And it goes on to say, it says, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Listen to this. It says, since this great tradition describes the most important application of AA's principle of anonymity, and because it sets the pitch and tone of our entire public relations policy, nothing can be more critically important. Wow, he's laying the hammer down. No guesswork. If public relations, or if personal ambitions ever invade our public relations, we shall be badly crippled, perhaps lost altogether. And it says, the danger, of course, is the possibility that we may one day recklessly abandon these principles of personal anonymity at the top public level. This possibility arises from the fact that many of us AAs have been, and sometimes still are, possessed by enormous power drives. These are frequently fueled by an almost irresistible craving for money, approval, and public acclaim. My own past history is outstanding in this respect. I can well understand the constant temptation to turn oneself into a public figure. Therefore, I have urged in season and out that we AAs maintain our personal anonymity at the top level no matter what the personal sacrifices may be. See how it's all interwoven together like that. Tightly interwoven to protect ourselves from ourselves. What Bill was talking about is there was a the Indians were a good team. There was a guy named Bob Feller. He was a great Indians pitcher, Hall of Fame. He pitched a no-hitter. The guy who caught it was a guy named Raleigh Helmsley. He was a bad drunk. Do you know how they got him in the hospital? They threw a ball and hit him in the head so they could get him in the hospital to 12-step him. That's how they detoxed him. Anyhow, Raleigh got sober. He was on the front page of the Plain Dealer. Big paper in Cleveland. The story got out across the news wire. Raleigh Helmsley, member of AA. Big deal. Guess who caught wind of that? Bill Wilson. He said, damn, if Raleigh's going to do it, I started this damn thing. So now Bill was on his going across the country doing a lot of talks. His name was on the papers before he arrived at the town. Bill Wilson was probably the biggest breaker of full-faced identifiable photos and names. And then he soon found the danger of what it was doing, and obviously, ergo, what we're talking about here. Absolute fascinating story. Bill, through his trial and error and his mistakes, was the biggest offender of this tradition, but at the same time, at the end, was the biggest supporter, was the biggest example on what not to do. So I guess the moral of the story is every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. So it's something to think about. So he goes on to say, it says, the danger, of course, is the possibility that one day we may be reckoning the personal no, we already did that. I'm sorry. We're down at the next paragraph. It says, our chief hope for the future is that these appalling urges of ours will be held in restraint by self-discipline, by love of AA, by firm group and public opinion. These powerful constructive forces all working together have thus far been enough. We pray that we may still always prevail. Let's look once more at how immense this temptation really is. A vast communication net now covers the earth, even to the most remotest reaches. Granting all its huge public benefits, this limitless world forum is nevertheless a hunting ground for all those who would seek money, acclaim, and the power at the expense of society in general. Here are the forces of good and evil are locked in a struggle. All, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, all that is shoddy and destructive contest all that is the best. So it's the best of the evil against the best of the best, right? Therefore, nothing can be more to the future welfare of AA than the manner in which we can use this colossus of communication. Used unselfishly and well, the results can surpass our present imagination. Should we handle this great instrument badly, we shall be shattered by the ego demands of our own people. Often the best of intention on their part. Against all this, the sacrificial spirit of AA's anonymity at the top of public level is literally our shield and buckler. Here again, we must, not should, could, ought to, we must be confident that the love of AA and God will always carry the day. So you can see he goes over it once again and again on how powerful this tradition 11 is. See what he says about anonymity on page 13. If you get a chance, time won't permit to read this whole article, so we're kind of skip the highlights. If you get a chance, do yourself a favor and try to read this tradition of born out of anonymity. It crosses in between 11 and 12, so I'll try to pull out just 11 on here. Once again, I urge you, please look at that date, 1946. Big Book was only 7 years old, not even, in January of 46. So here's what he wrote back then. In the years that lie ahead, the principle of anonymity will undoubtedly become a part of our vital tradition, life and death for the fellowship. Even today, we sense its practical value. Wow. So just sit down and don't ever say that it's an outdated thing. Anonymity, not only this week, but especially next week, is a practical value. But more important still, we're beginning to feel that the word anonymous has for us immense spiritual significance. Okay, and it says, subtly but powerfully reminds us we're always to place principles above personalities. Did I say that? Before personalities. That we have renounced personal glorification in public. That our movement not only preaches but actually practices truly humble modesty. The practice of anonymity in our public relations has already been a profound effect on us and upon our millions of friends in the outside world. There can hardly be a doubt. Anonymity is already the cornerstone of our public relations policy. Okay, so obviously we would have to say humility would be the foundation stone, step one. In the big book, he says step two is the cornerstone. So now we're saying anonymity is the cornerstone, obviously, of our public relations. How did this idea first originate and subsequently took hold in as an interesting bit of AA history? In the years before the publication of our book, Alcoholics Anonymous, we had no name. And if you want to go through that next couple paragraphs, it gives us a little bit of history of our big book and the name. We'll come back in January for the nuts. We talk about that at great length. Second paragraph on page 14. Second paragraph on page 14 after he gives us the history on how we named our big book. And it is, in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, there are only 3 references to the principle of anonymity. The foreword of the first edition states, quote, being mostly business and professional folk, some of us could not carry on our occupations if known. Remember how I told you anonymity came backwards to us? That's one of them. And when writing or speaking publicly about alcoholism, we are each of our fellowship, not the program, to admit his personal name designating himself instead of member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then we very earnestly ask the press also to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. So it wasn't so much for the anonymity that we use it for today. It was backwards of how it started. Is that odd or is that God? Skip the next sentence. It goes down to this and it says, next sentence, every one of them asks these questions, just how anonymous are we supposed to be? And after all, what good is this principle of anonymity anyway? And go to the next paragraph. It says, though we no longer fear the stigma of alcoholism as we once did, we still find individuals who are extremely sensitive about their connection with us. Skip the next 2 sentences. It says, on the other end of the scale of opinion, have the individual who declares that anonymity is a lot of childish nonsense. He feels it is bound duty to cry his membership of Alcoholics Anonymous from the housetops. Go to the next paragraph. In between these extremes, the shades of opinion are legion. Go to page 15, the second paragraph if you can. So while it's quite evident that most of us believe in anonymity, our practice of the principle does vary a great deal. Of course, it should be the privilege, even the right of each individual or group to handle anonymity as it wishes. But to do intelligently, we shall need to be convinced that the principle is a good one for practically all of us. Indeed, we must realize that the future safety and effectiveness of Alcoholics Anonymous may depend on its preservation. So now we're talking about future safety and effectiveness. On tradition 11. And change that up. Okay. Each individual will then have to decide where he ought to draw the line. How far he ought to carry this principle in his own affairs, how far he may go into dropping his own anonymity without injury to Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. The vital, life and death, question is just where shall we fix this point where personalities fade out and anonymity begins? As a matter of fact, few of us are anonymous so far as our daily contacts go. We have dropped anonymity at this level because we think our friends and associates ought to know about Alcoholics Anonymous, what it's done for us. We also wish to lose the fear of admitting that we are alcoholics. Though we earnestly request reporters not disclose our identities, we frequently speak before semi-public gatherings under our right names. We wish to impress audiences that our alcoholism is a sickness we no longer fear to discuss before anyone. So far, so good. If, however, we venture beyond this limit, we shall surely lose the principle of anonymity forever. If every AA felt free to publish his own name, picture, and story, we would soon be launched into a vast orgy of personal publicity, which obviously could have no limit whatsoever. Isn't this where, by the strongest kind of attraction, we must draw the line? If I were to outline the tradition of anonymity, it might run as follows. And it gives us bullet points by numbers, and yes, we are going to go through them quickly. He says, 1, it should be the privilege of each individual AA to cloak himself with as much personal anonymity as he deserves. His fellow AA should respect his wishes and help guard whatever status he wants to assume. Number 2, conversely, the individual AA ought to respect the feeling of his local groups as to anonymity. If his group wishes to be more anonymous than he does, he ought to go along with them until they change their views. Number 3, with very rare exceptions, it ought to be a national tradition that no member of Alcoholics Anonymous shall ever feel free to publish his name or picture in connection with Alcoholics Anonymous activities in any medium of public circulation or by radio. And of course, this should not restrict the free use of his name in public activities, provided he does not disclose his AA connection. Number 4, if for some extraordinary reason, the good of AA as a whole, a member thinks it is desirable to completely drop his name, he should only do so after consulting older members of his group. And they will tell him, you are done, go sit in the corner. If he is to make a nationwide public appearance as an AA, the matter ought to be referred to our central office or general service office. Of course, I am not for a moment thinking of these statements as rules or regulations. They merely suggest what would seem to be sound tradition for our future. In the last analysis, every AA will have to search his own conscience. If we are going to evolve a clear-cut tradition about anonymity, we shall do it only through our usual process of trial and error, much discussion, collective judgment, and common consent. To stimulate further discussion, I would like in the very early issues of the Grapevine to review our experience with anonymity. Then we shall eventually come up with the right answers, I have no doubt. And you can see from that article what it's developed to what we have today, thank God. Other than the recent phenomena. Now, let's see what he says on this next one here. Obviously, when we're talking about 17 to 20, please notice the date on this, March of 1946. Our anonymity is both inspiration and safety. So obviously, the first part of the article, I'll be darned, he just repeated what he did, the 4 explanations of anonymity. How cool is that? I guess that means that's what we need to follow and what we do follow and what we're going to follow. So, the bottom of page 17 where it says the word first, because the first 2 paragraphs is really a repeat of what we just got done reading. It says, first, I believe most of us who agree the general idea of anonymity is sound because it encourages alcoholics and the families of alcoholics to approach us for help. Still fearful of being stigmatized, they regard our anonymity as an insurance or problems will be kept confidential. that the alcoholic skeleton in the family closet will not wander in the streets. You don't see the old bag of bones walking down the street, right? Okay. Second, the policy of anonymity is our protection to our cause. Uh-oh. That's powerful there. Once again, the policy of anonymity is the protection of our cause. What is our cause? Our cause is what we have in step 12 and all the other traditions before this. It says it prevents our founders or leaders, so-called, from becoming household names who might at any time get drunk and give AA a black eye. No one need to say that couldn't happen. It could. Third, almost every newspaper reporter who covers us complains at first of the difficulty of writing his story without names. But he quickly forgets this difficulty when he realizes that here's a group of people who care nothing for personal gain. Probably it's the first time in his life he has ever reported an organization which wants no personal publicity. Cynic though he may be, this obvious sincerity instantly transforms him into the friend of AA. If you ever want to blow a reporter's mind, especially a new one out of college, give them an interview, but tell them, no, you can't use my last name, and no, we ain't getting any pictures or whatever. Because they just can't get it, because just every newspaper that you get is always so-and-so, first, last name, and a picture of it, and here we say absolutely, positively, and not at all, and they just cannot, it's so foreign to them that they just can't get their head around it. But if they're around long enough, it actually transforms them, and they really become quite an advocate. In fact, really one of our best advocates. In fact, if it wasn't for the press, Alcoholics Anonymous would not be what Alcoholics Anonymous is over the years. I mean, that's our history, was absolutely, we owe our very size and our very, public relations to the good relationships that we have with the press, radio, and film by following this tradition. So anyhow, he goes on to say, it says, therefore, his peace is a friendly peace, never a routine job. His enthusiastic writing becomes the reporter feels that way himself. People often ask how Alcoholics Anonymous has been able to secure such an incredible amount of excellent publicity. The answer seems to be that practically everyone who writes about us becomes an AA convert, sometimes a zealot. Is not our policy of anonymity mainly responsible for this phenomenon? The answer would be yes. Fourth, how he likes that, why does the public, the general public, regard us so favorably? Is it simply because we are bringing recovery to lots of alcoholics? No, this can hardly be the whole story. However impressed he may be by our recoveries, John Q. Public is even more interested in our way of life. That's what the book talks about, the blue book. Design of living. It's not about not drinking. It's not about physical sobriety. It's about a way of life. Unfortunately, we've changed Alcoholics Anonymous to a society who measures success on the last time we had a drink, then we drank or had a drink, rather than what it is. And what it is it's a fellowship that has a program that will ensure spiritual awakening, spiritual experience, transforming lives. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous is. It's not about last time we took a drink. It is, but it's not. That's a small portion of it. Anyhow, it goes on to say, in the way of life, wearying of pressure selling, spectacular promotion, shouting public characters, he's refreshed by our quietness, modesty, and anonymity. It may be well that he feels a great spiritual power is to be generated on this account, that something new has come into his own life. If anonymity has already done these things for us, we surely ought to continue it as a national policy. So very valuable to us now, it may be an incalculable asset for our future. Squiggly writing, italicized, is very important. In a spiritual sense, anonymity amounts to renunciation of personal prestige as an instrument of national policy. I am confident that we do well to preserve this powerful principle, that we should resolve never to let it go. Now what it's about, its application. We ought, of course, preserve the new member's anonymity so as long as he wishes it to be preserved. Skip a couple sentences. It says, while most of the newcomers do not care a rap who knows about their alcoholism, there are others who care very much. Let us guard them in every way until they get over that feeling. Then comes the problem of the newcomer who wishes to drop his anonymity too fast. He rushes to all his friends in the glad news of AA. If his group doesn't caution him, he may rush to the newspaper office or a microphone to tell the wide world about himself. He is also likely to tell everyone the innermost details of his personal life, soon to find that in respect he has already too much publicity. Go to the next paragraph. Then there is the problem of group anonymity. Like the individual, it is probable that the group ought to feel its way along cautiously until it gains strength and experience. There should be not too much haste to bring in outsiders or set up public meetings, yet this early conservatism can be overdone. Skip to the next paragraph. It says, in most places, but not all, it is customary for AAs to use their own names when speaking before public or semi-public gatherings. This is done to impress audiences that we no longer fear the stigma of alcoholism. If, however, newspaper reporters are present, they are earnestly requested not to use the name of any alcoholic speakers on the program. This preserves the principle of anonymity, so as far as the general public is concerned, at the same time represents us a group of alcoholics who no longer fear to let our friends know that we have been very sick people. In practice, then, the principle of anonymity seems to come down to this, with one very important exception. The question of how far each individual group shall go in dropping anonymity is left strictly to the individual or the group concerned. The exception is that all groups or individuals, when writing or speaking, that's all, not some, not most, when writing or speaking for publication as members of Alcoholics Anonymous, we feel bound never to disclose their true names. Except in a few rare cases, it is the point of publication that nearly all of us feel to draw the anonymity line, squiggly writing italicized, we ought not disclose ourselves to the general public. In our whole history, not more than a handful of A's have ever dropped their anonymity so as far as the general public is concerned. Some of these instances have been accidental, a few have been unnecessary, and one or two apparently justified. Of course, there must be few policies which cannot sometimes in the general interest be suspended, yet anyone who would drop their anonymity must reflect that they may set a precedent which could eventually destroy a valuable principle. I suppose we're talking about a matter of life and death. The exceptions will have to be few, far between, most carefully considered. We must, not should, could, ought to, must never let any immediate advantage shake us in our determination to hang on to a really vital tradition. And really vital, and like I said, obviously must. Not should, could, ought to. So he goes on to say, in conclusion, great modesty and humility, okay, are needed by every, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, AA for his own permanent recovery. Uh-oh. Now we're talking about not just recovery, permanent recovery. If these virtues are such vital, life and death, needs to be for the individual, so they must, not should, could, ought to, they be for the AA as a whole. I'm going to go ahead and read that again real quick. Great modesty and humility are needed by every AA for his own permanent recovery. If these virtues are to be vital needs of the individual, so must they be for AA as a whole. So once again, we see this is not an option. It is a must. It is required. And it goes on to say, the principle of anonymity before the general public can, if we take it seriously enough, guarantee the Alcoholics Anonymous movement these sterling attributes forever. Powerful, powerful, powerful. Our public relations policy should mainly rest upon the principle of attraction and seldom, if ever, upon promotion. Okay, now we are going to go on to page 205. I think we're starting to see where he's going with this, that it is not an option, it's something we must do, and what can and will happen if we don't. Now, this one through 205 and 208, this was Bill's experience, and it's really a neat story on what anonymity is and isn't. And remember, like I said, he went from the far left to the right, or from the far right to the left, and this is it. In early 1954, Bill declined an honorary degree of Doctors of Laws offered by Yale University. Wow, they were going to give him a doctorate at Yale. That's a big deal. That's huge. But let's see why he did it. Next page. This is correspondence between Bill and Yale University, and this is Bill writing this letter where it says WW. It says, victory has been gained through surrender, fame achieved through anonymity, and for many tens of thousands, emotional and physical and spiritual self has been rediscovered and reborn. So he's getting ready to tell them no. Then down at the bottom, Bill's writing this Mr. Holden, and it says, it is only after most careful consultation with my friends and with my conscience that I feel obligated to decline such a mark of distinction. In other words, Bill was going to be singled out as an extra special alcoholic. And we know that any big shot can always get whipped by a little shot, and listen to what Bill says and the reasons why he declined this down. It is so cool. Page 207, second paragraph. And now this is the reason. Now he's explained to him after a lot of fluff in the letter. It says, the tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous are means of self-government. So now if somebody asks you what the 12 traditions are, not only about the relations, it's about self-government. What that means is the alcoholic ego does and will come back. And these traditions keep the ego in check, or ego deflation, just like the steps. Self-government. And it says, entreats each member to avoid all, not some, not most, not a lot, not quite a few, all the particular kind of personal publicity or distinction which might link his name with our society and the general public mind. Skip down the next paragraph. Because we've already had much practical experience with this vital, there he goes again, life and death, principle, it is today the view of every thoughtful AA member that if over the years we practice this anonymity, absolutely, there is no gray area. Bill don't drop that word absolutely, or absolute hardly, and he just did. Absolutely, it will guarantee our effectiveness and unity. Wow. So now he's saying tradition 11, vital life and death, and guarantees our effectiveness and unity. By heavily restraining those to whom public honors and distinctions are but the natural stepping stones to dominance and personal power. Like other men and women, we AAs look with deep apprehension upon the vast power struggle about us, a struggle in myriad forms that invades every level, tearing society apart. I think we A's are fortunate to be acutely aware that such forces must, not should, could, ought to, never be ruling among us lest we perish together. Oh, I get it. So it's vital, life and death. The tradition of personal anonymity and no honors at the public level is our protective shield. We dare not meet the power temptation negative. Go down to the last paragraph on it where it says fortunately. And it says, fortunately they know it and I know it. Hence our tradition of anonymity, and hence my clear obligation to decline the signal honor with all its immediate satisfaction and benefit, it could have yielded. Going back or to page 208, if you can, on there, obviously it says, so while I might accept the degree within the letter of AA's traditions as today, I will surely be setting a stage for a violation of its spirit tomorrow. This would be, I am certain, perilous precedent to set. Though it might be a novel departure, I'm wondering if Yale Corporation would consider giving AA itself an entire citation admitting the degree to me. And they told Bill, go pound yourself. Go pound your salt. You drunks aren't going to get it. We'll give it to you individually. But isn't that cool story? That's practicing these principles in all our affairs. He said, no, if anybody's going to get it, the whole fellowship gets it or nobody gets it. And that is everything that we've been talking about in flesh and blood with boots on the soil there. One of the greatest examples of anonymity at work and what could and shouldn't be done. Okay, 209. And 209 to 218. Why Alcoholics Anonymous is anonymous. Starts, actually, we're going to go on to page 210, I think, because there's a lot to do, and we're going to be kind of crossing lines, but we'll get there. It says on page 210, then came AA. We faced about and found ourselves a new high road where the direction signs said never a word about power, fame, or wealth. The new signs read, this way to sanity and serenity. The price is self-sacrifice. In other words, there's a price for everything. I'm going to go ahead and read that again, obviously. We faced the high road directions of a word about power, fame, and wealth. The new signs read, this way to sanity and serenity. If you want it, here is the price. The price is self-sacrifice. If you ain't got it, then guess what? You ain't been sacrificing self. Our new book, 12 Steps to 12 Traditions, states that anonymity is the greatest protection our society could ever have. It says also that that spiritual substance of anonymity is sacrifice. You can tell this article is getting ready to set us up for next week, the final payoff, if you will, Tradition 12. Let's turn to AA's 20 years of experience to see how we arrived at that, now expressed in 12 in our Traditions 11 and 12. At the beginning, we sacrificed alcohol. We had to, or else it killed us. But we couldn't get rid of alcohol unless we made other sacrifices. So, here's what it is. Big shotism, phony thing had to go. We had to toss self-justification, self-pity, anger right out the window. We had to quit crazy a contest for personal prestige, big bank balances. We had to take personal responsibility for our sorry state, quit blaming others. Were these sacrifices? They were. I had to get rid of all my old hobbies. Okay, what am I going to do? Okay, now listen to what he says, y'all. He says to gain enough humility. Oh, it keeps going back to that. Humility and sacrifice. Okay, to gain enough humility and self-respect to stay alive at all, we had to give up what had been our dearest possessions, our ambitions and our illegitimate pride. But this was not enough. Sacrifice had to go much further. Other people had to benefit too. So we took on some 12-step work. We began to carry the AA message. We sacrificed time, energy, and our own money to do this. We couldn't keep what we had unless we gave it away. Did we demand that our new prospect give us anything? Were we asking for the power of their lives, for the fame of the good work, or for a cent of their money? No, we were not. We found that if we demanded these things out of our 12-step work went flat. So these natural desires had to be sacrificed. Otherwise, our prospect received little or no sobriety, nor indeed did we. Thus, we learned that sacrifice had to bring a double benefit, else little at all. We began to know that this kind of giving of ourselves had no price tag on it. So now we'll go on to see. When the first AA group took form, we soon learned a lot of this. We soon found that each, not some, not most, a lot, not quite a few of us had, once again, not should, could, ought to, make willingly sacrifices, not forced, but willingly, for the group itself, sacrifices for the common welfare. The group in turn found that it had to give up many of its rights for the protection and welfare of other members. and for a whole, these sacrifices had, once again, not should, could, ought to, be made of, or AA could not exist. Out of our experiences, the realization that these traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous began to take shape and substance. Gradually, we saw that the unity, effectiveness, and even the survival of AA always, not should, could, ought to, always depend on our continued willingness to sacrifice our personal ambitions for the desires of common safety and welfare. Just as sacrifice meant survival for the individual, so did sacrifice mean unity and survival for the group of AA's entire fellowship. Viewed in this light, AA's 12 traditions are little else than a list of sacrifices which the experience of 20 years have taught us that we must, not should, could, ought to, make individually and collectively